Yo, how's it going, everybody? I'm Brian. This is Ben. Welcome to 4FTV, where we cover all things related to faith, family, fitness, and freedom. And social media is killing the youth. That's what we're talking about. Last week, we just talked about how social media is killing you. And that is very true. But we ended up realizing we needed to go deeper on this topic because this can become a generational issue. And we are seeing these issues plague children as they get younger and younger, where we're seeing depression skyrocket, anxiety skyrocket, suicide skyrocket, and just absolute mental illness and disease is at the forefront here. And you listening right now have an opportunity to do something about it today. So Ben, how do we want to kick this thing off? What's the old punch in the gut that we got to give people right out of the start if I didn't do it already?
I'm going to try to kick it right through the goalpost with this one today. I think that, our last episode, we talked about the effects of social media on our psychological health, and particularly touching into the differentiation between the exposure of social media going into adulthood versus the exposure of social media, for adolescents, which was quite a marker for. And today we want to talk about the effects of, we're going to say social media, but really what we want to include is all of the, more modern saturation of services that involve streaming services, social media, everything that has really peaked or spiked in the last 10, 15 years, roughly. And we're not going to kind of, get into the nitty gritty of how much each streaming service contributes to that extra couple pounds that you've put on. But we do want to make sure that we give a 50,000 foot view of what has happened in some numbers. And so one of the things we want to talk about is that just so you all know, the markers for these are defining lines for these, I guess you say, classifications, are almost always either using BMI, which is a body mass index, and some of the other markers are using relative percentage over ideal body weight, which in some cases is 30%.
Just so you guys know, body mass index is just a ratio of height to weight.
Correct.
It's not a good tool to use, but it is the one most commonly used by most doctors and professions that are taking these stats.
Sure. And I think I think in our modern day and age with technology that we have now, people being able to go get a DEXA scan, or people being able to get some accurate kind of rendering of their subcutaneous and visceral fat levels, that should be kind of antiquated. But the one of the things that requires us at least referencing the BMI to a degree is that some of the data that we have that goes back 100 plus years uses BMI, because we were always taking into consideration somebody's height and weight.
And there still has to be consideration taken by all of you listening that even though things are much more complex than the BMI and just height and weight, you still have to acknowledge the truth and correlation that even 50 years ago, BMIs were not what they are today. And, yes, we've learned to get more athletic. We've learned to put on more muscle. Mm-hmm. But as my freshman basketball coach used to say to some of the young men that were not taking nutrition and athletics seriously, if you got a booty do, which is where your stomach stick out more than your booty do, then your BMI is probably it may not be perfectly accurate, but if your stomach's sticking out more than your booty do, that it's probably more accurate than you'd like to admit.
True. Or do some more hip bridges and glute exercises.
Yeah, exactly.
Balance it out.
Just build a donk.
Balance it out a little bit. No, absolutely. I mean, those are all very practical markers. I've never heard of the booty do before, but I'm definitely gonna throw that one in there now.
T-shirts coming soon if you guys comment and like the video.
Absolutely. So I think that just we wanted to make sure that we inform everybody that, in case you're wondering, the references or kind of ways of defining healthy weight or overweight different classifications of obesity, clinical obesity, chronic obesity, morbid obesity, that some of those are using BMI and some of those are using, percentages over ideal body weight. And we want to make sure we let you guys know that right away. So some of the numbers I want to go over that we talked about earlier before we started recording here are a lot more shocking than I kind of expected them to be. Now, I've noticed, I just turned 38. I've noticed that the amount of children that I remember, growing up friends with as I was a kid or whatever, that were noticeably overweight, compared to today when I'm out with my kids. Now I feel old just talking about it, but I'm out with my kids and we're at the grocery store shopping or out and about doing things. And the amount of children that I see that are noticeably, unacceptably overweight and, typically right next to a shopping cart full of Lucky Charms and all kinds of other things like that I'm sure are somewhat related. It's alarming. It's very alarming. And as a father who's very concerned with not just the mental and emotional health of my kids, but their physical health as well, it's sobering to me to see parents who maybe some of them are uninformed. Maybe some of them honestly are in denial. Maybe some of them are really they think they're doing the best that they can. And it may have even started with placating your kids by giving them more food so that you could keep your sanity and have 10 minutes to yourself. It's a slippery slope. And as a parent, as a single parent, especially, it's a lot to juggle. But so right now, what we know in the data, according to around 2017, 18, was that 1 in 3 adults are overweight. More than 2 in 5 adults are considered obese. And about 1 in 11 have what's considered severe obesity. And the similar correlation and increase with juveniles is just as startling. About 1 in 6 children and adolescents anywhere between the ages of 2 to 19, which obviously is a very big window, are overweight. Almost 1 in 5 children and adolescents between 2 and 19 are considered obese. So, put yourself in a room with 5 kids, and in this day and age, one of those 5 kids isn't just overweight, that they actually are going to have some form of obesity. And 1 in 16 children and adolescents are considered severely obese. And
I want to add to that real quick because obviously we're both relatively young. We're in our 30s, but I remember seeing clips of when JFK was in president and what PE classes were back in the day. And these are just things we got to start acknowledging. Like, physical education used to actually be physical education. It used to be about, hey, for the next hour, 45 minutes, we're going to prime our bodies. That might have been the actual only exercise that people had throughout the day. But because they had PE every day, they had 45 minutes of moving their body. They're climbing rope. They're doing monkey bars. They're running track. They're relay racing. They're playing sports. They're doing pull-ups, push-ups, squats, like you name it. It was actually pretty amazing because every person, no one was like a crazy jack dude. No one looked like Ben out there. But like at the same time, everyone was just very lean and physically fit. And for one thing, maybe that's where we have to acknowledge some of this also comes into play with the school system. And this also comes into play with, like, Ben and I have tried to convey, like, we are not saying you are 100% to blame. If you're watching this and you're a parent and your kid's overweight, like, you have to own the choices around, like, do you have a bedtime with them? Are they getting good sleep? Are you feeding them well? Are you making sure they're active? But there also used to be things put in place where, like, PE was PE. It wasn't, we're just going to like sit in our sweats on our phones and talk back to the PE teacher. We're not going to not run the mile that day. We're not going to just walk instead of run, which, again, if you walk every single day long enough, that can be good for health benefits and everything. But I want to at least acknowledge that, like, there are factors outside of your control. And some of that could be genetics that you were given, which you also have a responsibility to understand. Some of that could be circumstantial. Maybe you live in a lower income area and it's not as safe to be outside. Like, we understand those things as well. School systems are changing with what they expect and require of students, which I think is a shame, because we should be trying to push the physical and mental capabilities of the youth all the time. But those are just things that I wanted to acknowledge as well, that, you know, PE isn't even an everyday thing anymore. It's like 2 to 3 times a week instead of that. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like, oh, it's a free day, do what you want. And this is kind of like a weird full circle way of adding to what Ben was saying, where stop choosing what's easy over what's right. Stop choosing short-term relief for long-term issues. Parents, I understand maybe throwing some food at your kid will get them to shut up for a few minutes, but if your kid's not hungry, don't stuff food down their face. You're going to create an eating disorder. You're going to create a dependency on being numbed and nurtured by food. I know, because that happened to me for a while when I was younger, and it's something I did very bad eating habits where, oh, I'm depressed, let's go get McDonald's. I'm happy, let's get Chipotle, because it's a little like, and I'm not indicting Chipotle. They're probably the best option out of fast food out there. But the idea is, it's just like my reward and punishment system was food. And some of that might have been my parents, because I got rewarded by my dad a lot through food. And I was also restricted by food a lot through my mom. So it created these weird reward punishment systems around food. But I also chose to keep doing it to myself because my parents did it long enough that even when I had the choice, when I went off to college and became an adult, I still did the same thing. So parents, you have a responsibility to understand, even if something's easier for you, it doesn't mean it's better for your kid. And your responsibility is to think about your kid first and take care of them in most instances. You got to take care of your own health. You got to prioritize yourself and your mental wellness. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, don't pick what's easy for you at the sacrifice of your kid's future.
True. And I was going to kind of touch on this a little bit later, but since you mentioned the JFK era, I guess I'm going to jump to that. Well, two things. There were standards in PE, and whether they were rudimentary and kind of silly standards or not, they were requirements, and they were found to be a necessary thing for kids in that age and for people in general, really. But the other thing too is, from that time up until my childhood, the norms were so different than they are now. We live in a day and age now where it's dinner time. You got to find out where your kids are, and you're texting them from the kitchen to their bedroom, to get their attention or let them know it's dinner time and to find out where they are. And I still grew up in an era as a child where if you wanted to find out where everybody was, you looked for the pile of bikes in somebody's yard. Right. Or whatever your marker was for what you were doing. But the point is, you were doing something, and you weren't stuck in a sedentary position watching a screen for hours at a time, or in a room with a bunch of other people, and you're all watching your own screens in some form of, I don't know what you call it, but it's a pathetic form of socializing. And but since you mentioned that, I wanted to talk about that too. Not just that the PE was considered, necessary and standard to have in school, but all of the time that you spent outside of that, existence in school, you did not have the option, to sit still and find some other type of, vegetative entertainment. And so I wanted to say that the increases based on BMI, since that data goes back much further than taking body fat percentages and stuff like that, height and weight combination, that those numbers were fairly static through the later 19th century until, after Great Depression. So when we saw a big surge in available, homes with a radio, the increase in affordability of more food and access to it. And those numbers into the 50s saw a marginal increase as more people started to have more, access to radio and television, even though it was fairly limited. But one of the next largest jumps that we saw going into the 80s was after this, more major industrialization of the food industry, which is definitely a huge marker in there as well. And when Brian said earlier, we're not trying to cast blame on you if you're overweight or your kids are. What we want to do is to try to wake you up out of the matrix and let you know that you can very much, we all are to a degree, born into a system that we don't comprehend until we're in there long enough. And you also have to be willing to open your eyes to see it for what it is. And then, secondly, be willing to make steps in the right direction to remove yourself from the endless effects of that matrix, if you follow me. Mm-hmm. And so those numbers that we see always find this big jump or big leap after the onset of some form of available entertainment. And then again, the radical change in the industrialized food processing and marketing and availability, where we're created to be hunter gatherers. We don't hunter gather anything anymore. We just consume it by absurd quantities and food that is, super calorie dense and nutrient poor, unfortunately,
and have a long shelf life.
Exactly. Very, very, very long shelf life for sure. And so, getting back to the obesity rate changes, I also wanted to point out too that if we're some of these studies we're looking at are roughly 20 year ish, windows of time. And if we go from 2000 to 2009, 10, right around there, or 1999 to 2009, 2010, there's a marginal increase in some of those numbers. Nothing crazy. It might go from 30 to 33%, or right around there. You might see a 10% difference, close to that. But there is a great leap from 2009, 2010 to 2019, 2020, and those follow suit, with pretty close with the availability and wide access and usage of social media and increased streaming services that we see, that just like we talked about last week with the effects on mental health that they have. And so I don't want to, I don't want to talk the whole time, but I wanted to point out that entertainment forms in general have always been a temptation to kind of, again, placate us, pull us aside from any types of constructive activities. And what we have today is far more of an attack on our overall well-being and physicality than general entertainment in the form of TV, then color TV, then cable TV. Right. Now we can grab our remote and watch countless streaming sources and watch 30 episodes in a row, which sometimes.
Well, and I'll add to that, because the other day I was watching TV with my buddy at his place, and it was on regular TV, and the commercials drove me crazy because it was like 3-4 straight minutes of commercials. And I was like, what the hell is this? I'm supposed to click off an ad in 5 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever. So all of a sudden, what's so interesting is, as the rise of social media has happened, as we've switched from normal television, radio, whatever, to streaming, it's the goldfish effect compounding rapidly, where our attention is being pulled and grabbed all the time. More and more companies are having to switch to advertise on social media because it's more cost effective than TV and radio. But they have to get more creative to grab your attention. Now, all of a sudden, if I can click out of an ad in 5 seconds, you got to hook me in 5 seconds. Whereas before, I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to watch the show, I had to sit my ass there and wait 3 minutes or 4 minutes for it to come back. And those, coincidentally, in my opinion, were the mental breaks that made me realize it's not worth waiting for this commercial. I'm going to go do something else. Now that I have it's putting this false control in our hands that now that I have a choice to pick the show I want to watch, I don't have to wait for regularly scheduled television. I don't have to wait for 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. I can watch the show I want whenever I want and choose how many ads I want to watch. I can even pay to remove ads.
Sure.
All it's doing is putting this fake control, which is so crazy too, because somehow, and I'm not going to try to figure out the psychology behind this because there's billions of dollars and teams behind this. But Ben and I have great conversations about this all the time, which is why we're bringing it to you. You have the control to pick what you want, how long you're going to watch it, and how many ads you're going to see. And yet somehow we've lost more control than ever because these platforms are created, in my opinion, to give you a false sense of control, but they also smash your dopamine receptors so hard that you don't want to let go of this device because it's easier to get lost in this. I'm holding a phone to all of you listening but not watching. It's easier to hold this, to numb this, to make micro choices here that feel good in the moment that cost me in the long term than it is to do something a little more difficult. And Ben and I talked about it. Like, how many times have you gone onto YouTube and been like, man, I need to get pumped for the gym. I'm about to take my pre-workout, watch this motivational video, David Goggins saying, F this, F that, F you. And you're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden, oh, but I'm 4 motivational videos deep. 35 minutes just went by. I only have 20 minutes to work out. It's going to take me 10 to get to the gym, 10 to leave the gym. Wow, I already messed my workout up. I already missed it. And I just got pumped on pre-workout for no reason.
Absolutely.
But those are the things where you got to realize every social media company is competing with another social media company for your eyes and for your attention. And I know people that are, in Hollywood and in the film industry, and people that are actually trying to create like better children's shows with like slower tonality, not trying to, like, there's children's shows that manipulate your kids through color changes. It's not even what they're saying. It's just color changes that are, they're literally like flashing every couple seconds or changing hues because they know kids are going to keep registering it and being like, oh my gosh, like what is all this? I'm getting stimulated through my eyes, through my ears, through my whatever. And it's like, and I'm not going to rabbit hole down this and people might get upset, but it's almost like grooming your kids for stuff, man. It's just like, if I can steal your kids' attention from a young age, I can make them do whatever I want when they're older. And I can push my agenda because they're never going to turn this thing off. So,
I think that, again, we talked about earlier that, when we initially made the joke about, I'm just going to watch YouTube for like 5 minutes to get myself pumped up a little bit. And, you're something totally unrelated to what you're watching or what you need to watch pops up. And then you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting, because we got to remember we have unfortunately been subject to the rewiring of our incentive reward systems in our mind to the very erratic and very constant revolving and rotating of some kind of 15-second clip, 30-second clip. I made a post about that the other day. I'm trying to remember what my title is for the post, but it was basically, if you don't occupy your time with the significant, it will be consumed by the trivial. And that, time is ticking, but really it's tick-tocking, because we have,
Ben, you're just dropping one-liners all over the place.
We have, that came to me when I was writing the post, actually, because it was one of those moments where I was looking at, I was with my kids, and I took a picture of one of my girls, and I realized that, summertime approaches, she's got more freckles and stuff than before. And I realized that one of the last times I took one of those pictures, she was like half the size that she is now. Wow. And it was an emotionally sobering and difficult kind of moment, and grateful moment at the same time. It was a whirling dervish of emotions. And I realized that, time's flying by, but time's not just flying by. Time is being manipulated, for us and from us in a way that we've never had it happen before. And sometimes we don't even realize that it's happening. But when we first mentioned this, getting on YouTube and just watching for 5 minutes just to get a little fuel, a little boost before we go, be our best selves, and we got to remember that those platforms, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or TikTok, whatever else, those platforms are designed by people who do not want us to be a 5-minute user. They literally, they despise 5-minute users unless they can convert them into 2-hour users or more or whatever. And so, you have to, I think that when we understand the motive and intent behind both the people in our lives and the entertainment in our lives, we'll start to approach it differently. And I think that if we understand that there are people designing and creating all of these things that we are so inundated by, and the people that design and create those things don't want us to be our best, healthiest self. No more than the companies producing the foods that are making you sluggish and miserable and obese. They don't want you to be your best self either. They will package up and sell you something that they know appeals to you, but at the same time knowing that it's not what's good for you. And so I think when we, it's like, Rage Against the Machine had a song called Know Your Enemy. Not to date myself, but there will never be a better fusion of funk and metal ever. And so you have to be willing to recognize, both people and things in your life for what they are to you. And I think when we do that, it will help us be a little bit more intentional on setting boundaries with them.
Man. I know I haven't said it yet for all of you, so I'm just going to interrupt the eloquent words that Ben seems to always drop on here for some of our good little well, first of all, I'm going to give Ben this. I'm going to give him a little mic drop. But I'm also going to ask you guys right now to just make sure you smash the like button, subscribe to our channel if you haven't, and comment below what you think so far. We would also love to take your questions in the comments. Eventually, we might start putting out live shows if we get enough followings and we could take your comments live. But for now, the comments are what drives our episodes and our content, because ultimately we, living my own life experience, Ben's own life experience, being a father, being husbands, sons, daughters, wives, like we want to hear from everyone's perspective. We want to hear what you're struggling with, what you're doing well. If any of you have comments that you want to drop to encourage people of, hey, I was obese, this is how I got out of it. Hey, here's how I broke that generational trend in my family. Hey, here's how I took extreme ownership because I knew I couldn't rely on the government, the school system, anything outside of myself to make the change I want to see in myself. So if you guys have any of those thoughts or processes, we'd love to hear them in the comments below, and we'll absolutely get back to you. And it could potentially turn into episodes that we end up airing, in the weeks to come or the months to come, depending on when you're watching this. The big thing that Ben and I always want to stress on these shows as well. Today's episode is going to be a little bit shorter because I think you guys are getting the bang for your buck. We're packing a punch in this one. And we also don't want to be hypocrites. So we don't want you on here that much longer. So
right. Absolutely.
This is your sign right now to listen to the next, we'll say 5 minutes max, and make sure that you get ready to go do something today that your future self would be proud of, that your kids would be proud of, that your parents would be proud of, whatever you need. But the big thing we always want to do on these episodes is to leave you with actionable details. So we've been talking about how obesity is on the rise in children, and you saw the statistics where 30% were overweight, 40% were obese, 10% were considered severely obese. And to my understanding, how we read that data, that's talking about 80% of the population, 4 out of 5. That's pretty rough when we talk about overall health as an individual, as a family, and as a country. And we want to set good examples. So what we want to do is make sure that at the end of every episode, we wrap things up properly by giving you food for thought, giving you
Mhm.
takeaways where we can say, hey, soon as you leave here, here's something you can go take tangible action on today to start making a difference in your life. And we never want it to be a huge task or overwhelming. We want to make it bite-sized nuggets. So I'm going to go ahead and let Ben, because we were talking about it earlier, I'm going to have him give you a few things. I'm going to chime in, and then we're going to let you get on your way. So
Yeah,
Ben,
absolutely.
take the reins.
So the obviously, like I said, our last episode, we talked about the effects of tech and social media specifically on mental health, and there is undeniably some kind of bleed over line between our mental health and our physical health. That's undeniable. That's something that anybody who's reached adulthood has come to realize, that they very much are attached to each other. And one of the things that you can do is to obviously not just limit screen time, but limit screen time at specific times during the day. So not only is there data to show that screen time can be disruptive to falling into your REM sleep cycle or deep sleep cycle, screen time in general, having a TV in front of you, even though it's an easy habit to get into, falling asleep watching TV. But in more specificity, we know that social media has absolutely undeniable effects on stress, anxiety, other triggers that children in particular, various ages, have a harder time dealing with, and adults still do, but children even more so. And so there was some information I read compiled by the National Library of Medicine, and they basically came to very clear recognition that a 40% decrease in obesity in children whose parents limit their screen time was marked. Now, again, how much that has to do with the likelihood of screen time before bed possibly disrupting our hormonal balance throughout sound sleep cycles, or triggering stress that may have an effect on how much those kids want to eat or placate themselves otherwise, that's not known. But what we do know is that limiting that, putting some boundaries on that, as hard as it is, and I know this is too, as a parent, when my kids were little, I remember, Wind Up Boys, soundtracks you would play to kind of, I'm going back to the diaper days, and things you would do to try to help soothe them, which is perfectly okay. Sounds, vibrations, other things like that absolutely can very much be a benefit to getting kids again, both soothed and relaxed and ready for sleep, and adults as well. There's a lot of research on different types of frequencies and hertz affecting us to our benefit. And so it's not that, it's that there is something that we know is not to our benefit when it comes to the perusing and browsing of social media and things like that. And so I would limit that. The other thing too is, it's just like our diets, we talk about, even though we hate that word diet, just like our diet, we don't want to talk about just what we're taking out. We want to talk about what we're putting in. And so there's a huge advantage, even with our sleep quality, when we exercise regularly, like vigorous exercise. I've had even my clients of all different ages talk about how much better they sleep once they start a structured exercise program. I'm sure, Brian, your clients have reported the same. And so, one of the things that we know is this: kids need more activity than we do. Believe it or not, kids actually need more activity than we do. So, you might be able to get away with your exercise, guideline minimums with 30 to 40 minutes, 3 to 4 days a week, depending on the type of exercise. Kids, and I mean kids anywhere between like 2 and 16, 17 years old, really need like a solid hour of moderate to vigorous activity every single day if you really want to know what's best for them. And I know it's hard. I know it's difficult sometimes to try to convince them to do that much more running around. And I myself have found some creative ideas, not just to get them to do stuff, but to do stuff that I enjoyed as well. I remember I remember a period of time where my kids were starting to get into various shows they wanted to watch, whether it was on Netflix, whatever else it was, more regularly, more consistently. And I wanted to get outside and do more with them, and I wanted them to enjoy it with me as well. And they also like to play toys, which is perfectly fine. Kids need times, to work through their imaginative capacities. But they were into these toys called Hatchimals. They're like these little. It's all gimmicky stuff for these kids. These tiny little eggs that hatch, and there's some little figure in there that's just small enough to get stuck in the vacuum cleaner or to step on. And instead of just giving them these Hatchimals that I got them as a gift, I took our Nerf guns outside and I said, okay, I said, you guys can be on a team and you guys can gang up on daddy. And every time you guys went around, you guys are going to get one of these. And I think I had like a dozen of them because they came in this big variety pack or whatever. And I'm telling you what, we ran around the yard for I don't know how long, ran around and around and around the house. I don't know how many times. I got to get my dad and my boy fun in, shooting Nerf guns. And they knew that there was a prize to be had at the end of it. And it was cheap. It was practical. And it was one of those things where it's like, to this day, years later, they still remember it. And so
go ahead. Finish.
I say there's so many things you can do. And it takes you unplugging, literally, no pun intended, sometimes to come up with them. But there's so many things you can do to get your kids outside to do these types of activities and also bond with them at the same time.
Absolutely. And I actually remember Jordan Peterson talking about a similar thing that he used to do with his kids. But I'm not a parent, so I guess you can destroy me in the comments for giving parenting advice, but it's from Jordan Peterson, who's a parent, and it mirrors what Ben's just saying, who's a girl dad. And the big thing is, once you do that, when your kids get older, because you're like, dude, I'm going to have to keep this up forever. It's like, no, eventually more is expected to get the same or better reward. So it's like, okay, in the beginning, it's like, win around, get a Hatchimal. Eventually, if they get really good at it, it's like, hey, you got to win 3 out of 5 to get a Hatchimal.
Right.
Eventually, so I just want to encourage you, like, that is an awesome way to start, but you keep upping the ante as you go, because financially it might help some of you out a little bit more, but also it teaches kids, like, honestly, you can call it what you want, but it's like at some point kids need to learn, like, what used to be awarded becomes expected eventually. Because in school, it's like, hey, we used to get a playtime or a toy every time we listened to our teacher. Well, by the time you get in later elementary school or middle school, I'm not going to reward you for respecting the teacher. I'm going to expect you to respect the teacher. And same thing, it's kind of like in faith. It's like in the beginning, it's really uncomfortable with the idea of tithing. For any Christians out there, it's like, man, I got to give 10%. And then eventually you get mature enough and it's like, well, actually, I can do more with 90% blessed than 100% myself. And it creates a discipline of giving and a discipline of serving and providing. And it gets you noticing your finances more, where eventually, like, I'm not going to give you an attaboy for tithing because we're called to do it. But like, maybe that's what spurs on a different discipline. It creates more financial discipline around saving for something. I'm already used to taking 10% out. What if I took 12% out and that other 2% was for these Hatchimals or was for these whatever's to help my kids out, or that extra 2 to 5% was to go higher quality food. Like, when you start getting used to these little disciplines, all they do is build on top of one another. But you also need to realize, whether you're a child or you're a big old grown adult child, like, eventually you don't award or reward the same thing because it becomes an expected behavior. So in the beginning with these kids, like, yeah, absolutely. Award, be like, hey, every time, I don't know. I don't want to go into too many examples. Like, you guys get the idea, but it's like, if a kid really loves like sweets or whatever, it's just like, okay, but you got to eat your protein first. You got to eat your fruits and veggies first. You got to do something that's actually going to benefit your body and take care of it and build muscle and burn fat before I put all this sugar inside of you. And again, be careful about awarding around food. I'd rather award around experiences as well.
Sure.
And again, like if we're going to go out and get ice cream or whatever, like we might need to have a Nerf war beforehand. We might need to go run around and ride,
Right.
or parents,
Absolutely.
ride your bike to the ice cream shop and ride your bike back. You got
Sure.
exercise, you got the thing you wanted, and you exercise back. Like I think the biggest problem that we start to notice is social media has made things very sedentary and very instantaneous. So somehow we are moving less, but we're expecting more in a shorter amount of time. And that's just not the way the world works. If you've been sitting your butt on the couch watching videos every day of gym motivation instead of going to the gym every day and having your results build more internal motivation, I don't know what you're expecting as far as results
Sure.
to come, because they're not.
Yeah, and remember too that, like I think I mentioned this earlier on a different episode. Everything we're talking about is like addressing culture, addressing current trends, addressing these new norms, which I don't think obviously in many cases are good for us at all. But you forget that, growing up, when we think back growing up about culture, what life was like, granted, we had less influences in the form of media, but we still had media, we still had commercials, we still had TV, we still had video games, whatever. But the greatest influences you and I remember were from our parents. They were from the people, our grandparents, the people in our lives that were mentors of sort. And so one of the things that I don't, it's not that I'm not aware of it, but I guess I'm not as fully aware of as I should be, is that I'm not just trying to keep this ship afloat day to day with responsibilities. Sometimes I forget the magnitude by which I create the culture that my kids will see as life, as normal, as
Absolutely.
okay or not okay, as what's healthy or what's unhealthy.
Right
And
from
so
wrong.
yeah, right from wrong. So not to shoulder the parents out there with seemingly an increase of responsibilities when you already might be bursting at the seams with them, but with this charge, with this realization or awareness that as much as your kids are, my kids come home influenced from some little brats in their class that are on TikTok and have an iPhone 13 and stuff that, is horrendous for an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old to be able to be doing. But I come face to face with those influences all the time. And I try to lovingly, address those or kind of come to some conversation with those. But I also forget that there's a even greater influence that I have with establishing the culture within the walls of my home and within the confines of the minds of my children. And so that's just something I want to put out there to the parents out there, again, who typically are just trying to get by and survive. You have within you this great capacity for defining and relaying the world around you to your children.
Yep. It's it's your burden to bear, parents. If you're watching this, we want to encourage you. We want to let you know that, hey, you're doing a great job. You're doing the best you can. But just because I heard this the other day and it convicted me to the core. So I'm going to challenge you guys with this. Just because you're giving your best, does that mean that's good enough? Because you might be settling for what your best is instead of reaching for a new best. So I just want to encourage all you parents that are listening, adults who have uncles, aunts, anyone that has influence on the youth. If you're a teacher, please listen. Like, encourage conversation, normalize emotions being okay, but not acting out of emotion. I think music and social media and all this stuff constantly tells us we're not good enough, that our emotions, that we should also like act from emotion, and our feelings are our truth, and our truth is self-love. And like, these are very dangerous areas to get your kids growing up in, because then you're going to create people that only care about themselves, that only promote themselves and act on their feelings every time, instead of understanding the bigger question: why do I feel this way? If as Ben said, if a brat is influencing my kids, what is the kid's role? Not to take it personally, but they're a kid. How do they not take it personally? They look to mom and dad. They look to
Absolutely.
auntie and uncle. They look to grandma and grandpa and
Mhm.
say, this kid was doing this. And it's your guys' responsibility to normalize conversation like that, to tell them, hey, it's okay to be mad, but we don't act when we're mad. It's okay to be sad. We don't act when we're sad. We need to understand our emotions and why we felt this way and how we can act next time. Next time, if those kids are giving you a hard time, have a conversation with them. If they can't have a conversation and they keep acting up, you may need to talk to the teacher about it. You may need to talk to someone else. And ultimately, hopefully that doesn't lead to the kids just acting out of straight defiance. But if it does, another lesson to be told is just when people come after you, whether it's physically or verbally and emotionally, and say things to you, it's just them sharing their pain and they don't know how to do it healthily. They don't know how to do it properly. But again, when we talk about social media and obesity with the youth, if they're on these things all day, and I'm sorry, but if you're a parent that says, here, fine, take it because I don't want to deal with it, what are you teaching them? You're teaching them that if they act out in defiance, they get what they want. And then they get to numb and self-soothe through social media, which is constantly telling them they're not good enough. They're not pretty enough. They're not fit enough. They're not funny enough. They're not handsome enough, beautiful enough, whatever.
Sure.
It's your job to set the standard for your family and for your kids. Because let's be honest, 6 to 12-year-olds aren't watching this show right now.
Mhm.
It's young adults, it's adults, it's just anyone probably realistically like maybe 18, but probably like 21 and older is watching this because you're starting to ask these questions. If you have influence on the youth, get them active. Don't reward with food, but reward with activities and fun and memories together. Teach them to get off of social media and let their bodies actually regulate what
Mhm.
real dopamine is supposed to do, not instantaneous false hits that are constantly like just taxing their entire nervous system and brain out. Let them actually regulate through activity. Let them learn through experiences, through conversations with you. They shouldn't be learning shit here. They should be learning from you. So ultimately, we said we were going to keep it short and we probably went for another like 10, 15 minutes. So ultimately, my challenge to all of you, besides smashing the like button and commenting below and subscribing to our channel, is go out today. And if you yourself are overweight or obese, that's okay. First step starts today. Throw away the bad food or the crappy food. I'm sure labeling it bad is an issue, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Throw away the processed junk, go get some fresh whole foods. Eat a colorful dinner with your family tonight. Tell everyone tonight at dinner we're putting our phones face down in the other room on silent and we're going to have a conversation. And watch how an hour doesn't go by. Watch how everyone finishes dinner in 10 minutes and is like, what are we going to talk about? Because
Mhm.
we're not distracted on our phone. So do some simple things. If your kid is having a hard time, go do something active and fun like Ben said. Hey, you want to do this? Cool. You just got to beat me in this Nerf war first. You got to
Yeah.
just beat me in a free throw competition real quick. Hey, you got to beat me sprinting to the end and back. Like go out, do one thing today that is physically active with your kids and that is mentally and emotionally repairing and strengthening the relationship with your kids so they
Mhm.
don't have to go to social media to find help. So,
Absolutely.
with that being said, we're just going to close out and remind everyone I'm Brian. This has Ben. Thank you for listening and watching to 4F TV, where we cover all things related to faith, family, fitness, and freedom. And again, smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, turn the post notification bells to all. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, retorts, we don't care. We want to hear it. We want to support you. Comment in the comment section below, and maybe it'll turn into another episode. But until then, go out, do something that you would be proud of. Go out and do something that'll pour into your kids and pour into your family and future generations to come.